Miyazaki is really doing self-exploration, I think, with this film. And he's exploring his feelings about his life's work through this film and what it means to him. Hey everybody, my name is Nick. I'm a director and editor living in Taiwan, and today I'm going to be talking about the new Miyazaki film, The Boy and the Heron. It was originally titled How Do You Live, but for foreign distribution, for some reason, it was changed to The Boy and the Heron. The Boy and the Heron is rumored to be Miyazaki's last film, but I think there's a little bit of evidence within this film that hints that maybe there will be another film coming after it. And I'll talk about that evidence at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. So, The Boy and the Heron is about Mahito, whose mother died in a hospital fire in Tokyo, where she was working as a nurse. His father remarries and takes Mahito to the countryside, where he encounters a strange heron. That heron informs him that his mother is still alive, and he follows that heron into a tower that takes him into a strange, new, very Miyazaki-like world. First thing I noticed was how much more meditative and atmospheric the first part of the film was. There's a lot more stillness and realism in the first act than we have in other Miyazaki films. I think typically Miyazaki just places us into a fantasy world and we're there. And he's very good at setting up the rules and parameters and world building very, very quickly. This film in the very beginning spends a lot of time with the character of the boy as he goes to school, explores the grounds of where he's living, kind of follows this strange heron around. It's much more of an emotional study of Mahito. And in doing this, Miyazaki really captures this nostalgic feeling of loneliness of a child moving to a new place. He takes time to dwell in these interesting moments. And this is not something that is new. I think this is something very characteristic of Miyazaki. The ability to capture very specific feelings and moments of our life, of our childhood, feelings of loneliness and all of these things. And I really appreciated that this film took much more time in the beginning and all of those smaller moments. That was the thing that maybe I liked most about the movie. And so then what else was really great was then how Miyazaki builds the fantasy elements into this slower pace. The heron gets progressively stranger looking as the film goes on. The fantasy builds and builds slowly up until the midpoint of the film when the boy actually enters into the tower, into the fantasy world. And then we go into full-blown Miyazaki Fantasyland where everything is as you would expect it to be. I particularly appreciated some of the technical elements that Miyazaki used in this regard. So the music from Zhou Hisaishi starts very minimalistically with this kind of single piano hits, and it builds later on with the movie to this fuller sound. As Miyazaki does, he knows how to use music to perfectly match the tone of the film. I mean, he's a director that understands how music engages with the rest of his film. And I think The Boy and the Heron just reaffirms that mastery and reaffirms just the great relationship that he probably has with his longtime composer. So as mentioned, the film begins quite realistically and gets more and more fantastical. And this happens with the animation style as well. The animation and the way that things are drawn is drawn very realistically and grounded in reality. But abstractions slowly start to creep in, or they're in the background of the film from the beginning. The way fire is depicted is very interesting and impressionistic, kind of the melting of the entire frame of the film as they get closer to the fire and it consumes all of the colors and they start to melt. Right off the bat, this technique struck me as something that was very interesting and hints at this idea that this film is going to be more subjective, more from the perspective of an individual rather than from some omniscient force. And we get the cue that the rules of this world that we're in are going to be able to change quite dramatically. Another instance of this is the old ladies in the country home are drawn much more cartoonishly than the other characters. Even though they don't exist in any fantasy world, they exist in the real world. And so what I think is going on here is that the animation is motivated from the perspective of Mahito. So anything in his immediate range of experience, house, things that he knows, his father, his new mother. Those things are very realistic. They're drawn very clearly. Other things around him that are new and strange become cartoonish, sometimes impressionistic, sometimes blurry. There's a part where a guy is pulling a rickshaw for him, and that guy kind of blurs as he moves a little, while everything else around them is quite clearly drawn. And I think because of this technique, the introduction of the fantasy elements works that much more, and it helps to build this character. So we start to understand that these fantasy elements kind of encroaching on this realistic world is a reflection of this boy being untethered from reality. So Mahito decides to follow the heron and enters into another fantasy world, and that's when the film really takes off, and it introduces us into a multitude of fantasy elements, ones that we would typically expect from a Miyazaki film. I don't want to go into any specifics and spoil any of the fun things that happen in there, but in my opinion, there's a lot of fun characters and interesting things that occur in this fantasy world. There's also a lot of interesting tone shifts in the movie that happen. There's a lot of different things that go on in this world that sort of change the rules that we feel like this film is giving us. Now, I've seen some criticisms of the film in that regard that say this is kind of like a mishmash of characters, that the ideas aren't cohesive, and that it's just being random for the sake of introducing elements that are going to please the audience and what they want from a Miyazaki movie. And I do think this is kind of true, but I think what Miyazaki is doing in putting in a lot of these different characters and mixing the tone similar to his older films, I think this is being done intentionally. And it's very intentional because it relates to the theme and the meaning of the film as a whole. Without revealing too many details about what happens here, a lot of these characters and settings harken back to Miyazaki's old work. There's also the way that the tone shifts in the movie constantly. It shifts from being whimsical to being serious to being violent to being sentimental. We get the sense that we're kind of going through the range of Miyazaki's past work in this fantasy world. And I think that's what we're talking about. That's what Miyazaki is trying to say with this film. He's talking about how people use creativity to create worlds, to deal with loss, to deal with trauma. And the thing that I really thought was interesting, that I think this film goes even deeper to another layer, and it kind of criticizes that pursuit. And it kind of looks at how when we try to create this temporary escape through art, that temporary escape is imperfect and fragile and may not fulfill us. And I think when we look at the film through that lens, as a potential meaning for the film, then I think the film starts to seem less random. We realize that it's not pandering anymore. Miyazaki is really doing self-exploration, I think, with this film. And he's exploring his feelings about his life's work through this film and what it means to him. So this brings me to the hint that The Boy and the Heron leads me to believe that we may be lucky enough to get one more Miyazaki film. We know that Miyazaki said this is his last film, but he also said that The Wind Rises was going to be his last film, and lo and behold, he made The Boy and the Heron. So I think we have a chance that he will make another one. And the reason is because the sorcerer who creates this fantasy world has 13 stones. He very specifically says these 13 stones make up this world. Well, Miyazaki has made 12 films. The Boy and the Heron is a number 12. So if he has 13 stones, perhaps that 13th stone is one more film that Miyazaki has planned. But this also could just be Miyazaki subtly trolling us. That is also a possibility. He might just be messing with people. You know, he does have a little bit of a kind of, I think, a scampiness to him as a director. For example, there is cigarette smoking in this film. And cigarette smoking was something that he was very criticized for with The Wind Rises. And I do believe that him putting smoking in this film as well was almost a subtle, like, you to people that got mad at him for that or criticized him for that. And personally, I dislike smoking. I think it's horrible and wrong. And I also think it's probably bad to be putting in a movie that children are definitely going to see. However, I do appreciate the artistic integrity and that he just wants to be able to do what he thinks is correct. If people smoked during, the 1940s, then I'm going to put that in my movie. I don't care what you think. I also think there's a little bit of an element of him sick of people telling him that he makes kids movies. I think he just wants to make films. So that's why I think a lot of the gore elements in this movie are very almost kind of shockingly overstated. It's a little bit of a callback to Princess Mononoke, but it's also a little bit of a like, hey, just remember, I'm smarter than your child, all right? And this is for people to think about, all right? So let's put some weird bloody bones in the background and have blood gush out of somebody's head. Yeah, those things happen. So what did I think of this movie? I honestly thought this movie was fantastic. I kind of understand some of the criticism that I've been seeing and people who were a little disappointed by this film, but I think over time this movie is going to be recognized as a very good addition to his filmography and a needed one. Where would I rank it? I recently did a ranking of Miyazaki's films. You can check out that video where I ranked the best to the worst, even though I think all of his films are great. Where would I rank this one? This one I would rank probably, honestly, right in the middle. I'm not sure, maybe in the 7, 6, 5 slot, under Princess Mononoke, out of the elite tier for sure, under Princess Mononoke, maybe under Nausicaa, maybe under Castle in the Sky, in that range. The Boy and the Heron is a film that I definitely will re-watch because there's a lot in there. There's a lot of detail, things that I still don't know exactly what they mean, but I think and I trust Miyazaki has a reason for putting everything in his films, so I definitely want to rewatch it and kind of unpack all that stuff. So let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you liked it, if you didn't like it, have you seen it, have you not, and what other movies I should review on this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, like, share, subscribe, do the YouTube things that you know how to do already, that every YouTuber has been telling you to do, and I'll see you guys next time.